Mara Bell was on her knees under a birthing bed when the gunfire started. The first shot cracked across Dry Creek hard enough to rattle the lamp glass. The young mother above Mara gave a frightened cry and tried to twist away from the pain already splitting through her. Mara planted one broad hand on the woman's shin, reached with the other into the hard work of turning a stubborn shoulder, and said in a voice steady enough to lean a life on, "No time for fear now, Cora. Your baby has made up his mind. You do the same." Outside, horses pounded the street. A man shouted. A bottle broke. Inside, the room smelled of hot water, blood, lye soap, and the sharp penny tang of fear. Mara ignored all of it except the laboring girl and the child caught halfway between worlds. Before we go any further, settle in where you are tonight and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. We like knowing who's with us. Cora Pritchard was 19, white with pain, and so frightened she had bitten the inside of her lip bloody. Mara caught the blood on a cloth, never pausing. She had delivered babies in mining shacks, wagons, tents, snowed-in cabins, and once in a church aisle during Easter singing. A little shooting outside did not change the work. "Look at me," Mara said. Cora did. That was enough. Mara changed her grip, turned the child, and the next push brought him sliding into her hands, red and furious and alive. His cry rose through the room just as another shot rang outside, and for one bright second the baby's voice won. Cora broke into sobs of relief. Mara tied and cut the cord, checked the bleeding, wrapped the child, and laid him on his mother's chest. Only then did she stand up. She was a big woman, built like something made to endure weather. Thick wrists, strong back, dark dress plain as a fence post. Men laughed at that size until they needed a stove lifted, a horse gentled, or a wife kept alive through a winter birth. The front door slammed open and Deputy Ellis Pike stumbled in, one sleeve wet with blood. "Ms. Bell," he said, breathing hard. "Sheriff says stay off the street. Talbot's men are in town." Mara was already rinsing her hands. "Sit. This ain't mine to bother you with. You're bleeding on my floor. That makes it mine." He sat because everybody sat when Mara used that tone. She unwound his kerchief, cleaned the crease where a bullet had torn past his arm, and bound it tight while he winced and tried to talk through it. Rance Talbot took Hollis Dunn off the road, or that's what folks are saying. Sheriff rode out, came back, and now half the town's whispering Talbot means to make an example of somebody before dawn. "Examples are for men with weak arguments," Mara said. Ellis tried to smile. "Then he's got a powerful weak one." A tapping came at the side window. 3 knocks, a pause, then 2. Mara went still. Nobody in Dry Creek knocked like that. She crossed the room and opened the door to the alley. A hatless boy stood there holding a folded paper. He shoved it toward her like it might burn him. "Man at the livery paid me $1, he muttered, then ran. The paper was a warrant. Territorial seal. Transfer order. One female fugitive, formerly known as Marian Vale, wanted in connection with the Penn Hollow prison fire, the escape of inmates, and the deaths of 3 guards. At the bottom, below the neat official hand, was another line in a sharper script she knew at once. "I told you I'd collect what you stole from me. Rance Talbot." Marian Vale, a name she had buried so deep she had almost convinced herself the dirt had accepted it. Ellis rose from the chair. "What is it?" Mara folded the paper once. Her face gave away almost nothing, but he saw enough. "How many men does Talbot have?" 6 I saw. Maybe more. Then he isn't here for Hollis Dunn." She set the warrant beside the lamp. "He's here for me." From the bed, Cora clutched her baby tighter. Outside, hoofbeats slowed in the street, careful and deliberate. That was the moment Mara understood the life she had built in Dry Creek had just cracked open. By breakfast, the whole town knew. Rumor traveled through the mercantile, the livery, and every kitchen door in town. By the time the sun cleared the Wyoming hills, children were called off porches, windows were half open with faces behind them, and women who owed Mara everything were looking at the street instead of at her. She walked to the jailhouse anyway, carrying her satchel the way she always did. Dry Creek sat on the open land east of the mountains, where the wind came mean and nothing stayed hidden long unless people wanted it hidden. Mr. Finley swept the same patch of boardwalk without moving a shaving. Mrs. Voss wrung a dish towel till her knuckles shone. Nobody stopped Mara. That hurt more than if they had. Sheriff Amos Reed was waiting in his office with the warrant on his desk, and a pot of coffee boiled nearly black. He was a square-built man gone gray at the temples, the sort people trusted because he looked like he'd rather listen than speak. "Tell me it's a lie," he said. Mara sat down carefully. "Which part?" "Any part." She looked past him at the cell bars, at the rifle rack on the wall, at the patch of morning light on the floorboards. Then she said, "My name was Marian Vale. I worked as a nurse in Penn Hollow Prison Hospital when I was 26. There was fever through the women's block. The doctor drank. The guards did what they pleased." Amos did not interrupt. One night a girl named Lena Briggs was brought in from solitary. 17. Back cut open. Locked up for stealing medicine for her brother. She told me Rance Talbot had already arranged to take her when her sentence ended. Not marry. Take. 3 nights later a fire started in the laundry wing. I didn't set it. But when the keys fell and the smoke came thick, I opened cell doors. 7 women ran. 3 guards died in the confusion. The papers called me a murderess because that was easier than admitting what kind of place Penn Hollow was. Amos rested his elbows on his knees. And Talbot? He was a contractor then. Freight, coal, prison supplies. Also girls, when the price suited him. Mara's voice stayed level by long habit. Lena got away in the fire. Talbot never forgave me for costing him what he considered his property. Did you kill those guards? No. Set the fire? No. Open the doors knowing prisoners would escape? Yes. He sat with that. The easier path was plain. Right out now. Take the north trail through the breaks and disappear into the country like she had once before. She still knew how to travel light, sleep cold, and leave no fire sign. Talbot wanted her. Let him chase her across empty miles until one of them dropped. But if she ran, Talbot would punish Dry Creek for sheltering her, or for failing to hold her, or simply because powerful men hated being denied an audience. And Cora was still weak. Esther Reed was close to term. Mrs. Voss's daughter could start labor any day. Mara knew too well how women paid for men's vengeance. Amos looked up. I can put you in a cell until the circuit judge comes. It's lawful. Lawful for whom? Mara asked. For the man with the seal? Or the person the seal gets used on? He frowned. You asking me to ignore a warrant? I'm asking you not to confuse paper with justice. Men like Talbot count on that confusion. Mara laid her big, scarred hands flat on his desk. Hands that had delivered nearly every child in Dry Creek. Hands that had stitched men after bar fights and sat with women through miscarriages and wrapped stillborn infants in clean cloth when the fathers could not bear to touch them. A person isn't what the worst room in the world called them, she said. That was the first line Amos would keep. He took a long breath, folded the warrant, and put it in his pocket. You don't leave town, he said. Wasn't planning to. You don't leave my sight without telling me. That an arrest? It's the best I can do before noon. The town answered the news in pieces. Mrs. Voss came by with biscuits and would not step fully inside. Old Mr. Finley muttered that women with secret names generally earned them. 2 ranch hands pretended not to stare. And then there were the others. Mrs. Pike setting down broth without a word, and young Ruth Barlow hovering by the post office as if she wanted to speak and did not yet know how. Mrs. Voss finally asked the question everybody else was chewing on. Are you what they say? Mara could have answered softly and made life easier for them all. Instead, she said, I've done worse and better than they say both. Mrs. Voss's mouth trembled. She left the biscuits anyway. By noon, Ellis Pike had news. Talbot had never meant to free Hollis Dunn. He had only stopped the jail wagon long enough to let the rumor loose and make the town look over its shoulder. He's riding in at dusk, Ellis said. Wants folks watching. Mara was cleaning her instruments, each one laid straight on white cloth. Of course he does. Cruel men love an audience. You could still go. She did not look up. Last time I ran from men like him, other women paid for the ground I gained. I won't do that again. That was the harder choice, and the town heard of it before the hour was out. Late in the afternoon, Mara walked to the Reed house. Wash shirts snapped on the line. Esther stood on the porch with one hand on her back, her belly round beneath her faded dress. Amos says you should stay at the jail, Esther said. Amos says many things. Mara knelt, put both hands to Esther's middle, and shifted the baby with a firm practiced pressure that made Esther gasp. There. Your daughter was sitting sideways like a county judge. Esther huffed a laugh, then sobered. What will you do when Talbot comes? Mara rose. Penn Hollow came back in one hard blink. Smoke in the corridor. keys burning hot in her palm. Lena Briggs's eyes wide in the dark. Whatever keeps him from putting his hands on anybody else. Esther caught her sleeve before she could turn away. What would you have done back there? In the prison, I mean. With the keys. Maybe that is the question in the middle of this story too. If you had stood where Mara once stood, with the law in one hand and another woman's life in the other, which would you have chosen? Would you have stayed and fought in this town, or saved yourself and ridden? Mara only said, I'd do the costly thing again. Then the first rider appeared at the far end of Main Street. Talbot came in slow with 6 men behind him and sunset turning the dust copper around their horses. He rode a black gelding and wore a coat too fine for work. His face was handsome in the empty way some knives were handsome. He drew up before the jailhouse while the town watched from boardwalks, doors, and wagon shadows. Sheriff, he called pleasantly. I've come from Marian Vale. Amos stepped out with Ellis beside him and Mara behind them both. Talbot's gaze settled on her and sharpened. He had expected fear. She gave him none. You've changed, he said. You've not, Mara replied. A murmur moved through the crowd. Talbot unfolded the warrant and held it high. Signed by Judge Merriman. Harboring her makes you accessories. Hand her over, Sheriff, and I'll be on my way. You can present that warrant in circuit court, Amos said. Until then she stays under local protection. Talbot smiled as if the sheriff had made a childish joke. Protection? Ask these people whether they want their wives touched by a prison killer. Ask them if guilt is why she charged nothing. Mara stepped onto the boardwalk, where everyone could hear. Need is why I charged nothing, she said. Babies don't belong to ledgers. Talbot's eyes cooled. You stole from me. I stopped you from buying a girl. If that felt like theft, your soul knows why. One of Talbot's own riders laughed before he could help himself. Talbot heard it. So did Mara. Then Cora Pritchard's husband came running down the street with terror on his face. Ms. Bell, please. She's bleeding. Talbot saw the opening as clearly as everyone else. Go on, he said softly. Let the town watch a saint at work. Mara was already moving. Inside the Pritchard house the air was too warm and too sweet with blood. Cora lay gray-faced against the pillows, the baby wailing in a box by the bed, the sheets dark beneath her hips. Boil water, Mara snapped. And everyone not useful gets out. She worked with the clean speed of long practice. Retained tissue. Boggy womb. She reached in barehanded while Cora screamed, cleared what had to be cleared, packed cloth, forced bitter shepherd's purse between the girl's lips, and pressed hard until the bleeding slowed. Outside the window came hoofbeats, then shouting, then a single shot. Mara did not look up. Stay with me, she said. Pain isn't death. Follow my voice. The bleeding eased. Cora's pulse steadied. Only then did Mara feel the silence outside go wrong. A shadow filled the doorway. Talbot stood there alone, hat in hand, as mannerly as a man entering church. Behind him in the hall Ellis Pike lay against the wall with blood on his brow and no rifle in sight. I told my men not to fire in the birthing room, Talbot said. I do have standards. Mara rose slowly, her forearms red to the elbows. Then you've set them low enough to step over. He closed the door behind him. Cora made a small frightened sound. The baby had gone quiet, which somehow made the room feel even more dangerous. You have caused these good people a great deal of trouble, Talbot said. Sheltering you makes them your kind. My kind. The kind that thinks rules are for other people. Mara shifted left, placing herself between him and the bed. No. My kind knows a locked door can be a crime. Something moved in his face at that. Memory, sharp and ugly. Lena Briggs froze to death north of Casper, he said. All that mercy of yours bought her mud in her mouth. The words landed like a club. For 17 years Mara had kept a secret hope alive that Lena had found another name and another life somewhere far from men like Talbot. He watched her take the blow and smiled. Women reach above their station, he said, and this is what becomes of them. From the bed came Cora's weak but clear voice. Then thank God she reached anyway. Talbot turned, surprised that someone he considered nearly dead had spoken at all. Cora was half upright, shaking, one arm around her baby, hatred bright in her exhausted face. That was the revelation in the room. Not that Talbot was rotten. Mara had known that. It was that the town's courage had been living in places men like him never looked. In frightened mothers, in widows, in people who remembered whose hands had held them at the edge of loss. A roar rose outside. Not panic now. Anger. Talbot's hand dropped toward his pistol. Mara moved first. She hurled the wash basin into his face. Water and blood blinded him. His shot went wild into the plaster. Mara drove her shoulder into him with all the weight men had mocked since girlhood. He crashed against the dresser. She slammed his gun hand into the bedpost once, twice, until the pistol fell. He struck back hard enough to split her lip. She tasted blood. He lunged for the gun. She stamped his hand and heard something crack. The door burst open. Amos stood there with a rifle leveled. Behind him came Mrs. Voss holding Ellis Pike's rifle badly, but with unmistakable purpose, and behind her a hall full of townspeople who had finally picked a side. Talbot, on one knee, spat red onto the floorboards. "You have no idea what she is." Amos never lowered the rifle. "I have a fair idea what you are." Outside, Talbot's riders were being stripped of weapons by ranch hands, clerks, and one furious blacksmith's wife with a shovel. The town had found its backbone all at once, and it had found it by choosing Mara. They locked Talbot in the cell he had expected for her. Night settled slowly after that. Watches were posted. Telegrams were sent. One went to the territorial marshal. People do. After a silence, Amos drew something from his coat pocket. A small tin locket, blackened on one side. Found it in Talbot's things. Mara opened it with fingers that did not stay steady. Inside was a folded scrap with one name on the back. Lena. Mara shut her eyes. "He kept it," Amos said, voice rough with disgust. "She borrowed it from me the night before the fire," Mara whispered. "Said she wanted one thing that had belonged to a free woman." Amos did not speak. He only stayed there while she grieved. Sometimes that is the best mercy one person can give another. After a while, Mara said, "In Penn Hollow, when guards and contractors put babies in women who never asked for them, I delivered those babies too. Sometimes I saved the mothers. Sometimes I didn't. After that, I could not bear the thought of a first breath belonging to a bill." She looked down at her hands. "Mercy is only free to the person receiving it." That was the second line that stayed. The screen door eased open and Esther Reed came out carrying a tiny pair of blue knitted booties. She settled on Mara's other side and set them in her lap. "For Cora's boy," Esther said. "And before you refuse, I didn't bring them as payment. I brought them because decent people can be late and still mean what they finally do." Mara traced the crooked stitches. Esther laid a warm hand over hers. "Home isn't always where you started," she said quietly. "Sometimes it's the place that finally learns your name and doesn't use it against you. If this story is moving you right here, you are exactly who it was written for. A like and a subscribe tell us to keep making room for people like these." Mara leaned, just a little, until Esther's shoulder touched hers. It was the smallest thing in the world, and because of that it meant everything. The danger was not gone. Talbot was still breathing down the street. The judge still had to come. The old charges still existed. But something had changed that could not be changed back. Dry Creek had seen her fully, and she had let herself remain. Judge Elias Merriman arrived 3 days later with a clerk, a marshal, and the look of a man expecting easy business. The Cheyenne lawyers sent affidavits from 2 surviving escapees, both women now living under respectable names, both swearing Marian Vale had not started the fire and had refused to flee until the sickest prisoners were moved first. The marshal laid down another packet tying Talbot to freight fraud, land theft, and witness intimidation across 2 counties. Talbot's confidence drained one careful drop at a time. Judge Merriman cleared his throat and announced the murder charge against Marian Vale suspended pending full review, the warrant withdrawn from immediate effect, and Rance Talbot remanded into federal custody on charges of fraud, conspiracy, unlawful confinement, and obstruction of justice, with further indictments likely. Talbot laughed once. On the word of women. On the weight of evidence, the judge snapped. But Talbot had never accepted a world that answered no. As the marshal stepped forward, Talbot twisted, snatched the clerk's revolver, and backed toward the church door. Gasps tore through the room. Mothers dragged children behind pews. Amos froze at the angle of the gun. Talbot looked straight at Mara. "You ruin everything you touch," he said. He fired. Mara moved before thought. Esther Reed stood exposed at the end of the aisle, one hand at her belly. Mara hit her hard enough to send them both to the floor behind a pew as the bullet shattered the baptism basin instead. Water burst over the boards. The room exploded into shouting. Talbot ran for the churchyard and his horse. Mara came up with the broken iron basin stand in both hands. All those years of carrying water, lifting bodies, bracing laboring women, and doing work men thought too low to honor had built themselves into her muscles for this one moment. "Rance," she called. He turned, one foot in the stirrup. She threw. The iron struck him full across the jaw and knocked him into the dirt beneath the horse's neck. His revolver flew from his hand. He scrambled toward it, dazed. Mara was on him before he could rise. She planted her boot over the gun and then hard on his wrist. He looked up at her, astonished that the body he had once dismissed as too large, too female, too ordinary to matter was the body pinning him helpless in the churchyard before the whole town. "You always hated what you couldn't buy," she said. Amos and the marshal hauled him up in irons while the townspeople watched his coat tear, the blood run from his mouth, and every shred of borrowed dignity leave him in the dust. Justice did not stop with the arrest. Within weeks, federal agents seized Talbot's freight office, land claims, and holding barns. Hidden ledgers surfaced names, bribes, routes, and payments. 2 county officials lost their posts. A banker lost his freedom. Families forced off parcels during drought years had claims restored. Money taken from Talbot's accounts went first to widows and ranchers he had ruined, then to the building of a proper clinic on the rise above town. When they asked what name should go on the sign, Amos suggested Bell House and Ellis suggested Marian Vale Clinic. Mara shook her head. Penhollow took enough names. "We won't build anything good by feeding it one more." So the sign read Free Women's House, though everybody called it Mara's place from the day the paint dried. The rest settled in visible ways, the kind this audience deserves after walking so far with people. The charges against Mara were formally dismissed before the first snow. Cora's son lived stout and loud. Esther's daughter arrived on a sharp November dawn with Mara at the bedside and Amos fainting once, which the town never let him forget. Ellis Pike started courting Mrs. Voss's widowed cousin with flowers he pretended not to pick himself. Mrs. Voss became Mara's fiercest defender in 3 counties. The town did not become perfect. A few still crossed the street when old fear bit them. But most learned better. They brought eggs, wood, lamp oil, and stories. They sat at Mara's table. They asked questions. They listened. Spring came green along the creek. Babies kept arriving, unimpressed by scandal. Mara kept catching them and laying them into waiting arms. She still charged nothing to women who had nothing. When the county insisted on a salary, she accepted it only after Amos told her that being needed did not forbid being cared for. 2 years later, on a summer evening, the windows of Free Women's House stood open to clover and rain-cooled earth. 3 children Mara had delivered chased lightning bugs through the yard. Inside, Cora Pritchard laughed while mending a sleeve. Esther Reed rocked a sleepy child by the stove. Lena's locket hung openly by the lamp. In the ledger, unpaid fees were marked settled by eggs, by sewing, by firewood, by kindness, by nothing at all. Mara stood in the doorway with her sleeves rolled and lamplight on her face, listening to the ordinary sounds she had once thought were for other women. She had spent half a lifetime believing the past would always arrive first and call her by the worst thing attached to her name. But there, with clover drifting in and children's laughter running through the dusk, she understood at last that sometimes the life meant for you comes late, carrying scars, and still knows the road home. The last light rested on the clinic windows while the children ran gold through the grass, and the whole valley lay quiet around them like a promise finally kept. Next time, we'll tell the story of a deaf seamstress sent west because her family called her a burden, and the scarred ranch foreman who learned that silence can hear truth quicker than words ever do.